Episode 22, Citizenship.
The Anarcho-Christian Podcast, evaluating the relationship between the Christian and the state.
I'm rising up with the full heart. I'm taking my strength from inside. I'm rising up with a new mind. I'm taking your words to the new me. I'm coming up from my...
Hi everyone, welcome back. In today's episode, I will be discussing citizenship. But before we begin, and if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button on whatever podcatcher you're using, so not to miss any future episodes. And if you're not sure where to find us, visit anarchochristian.com/subscribe. There you'll find links to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Android, Google Play, and YouTube. If you're enjoying the podcast, please consider letting us know by leaving a 5-star rating and review on iTunes or wherever you catch the episodes. It will help us reach more listeners and grow the show. Also, you can support the show with a one-time or monthly donation through Patreon. Thank you, Douglas, for becoming our newest patron. If anyone else is interested, visit the support tab on anarchochristian.com. That will take you to our Patreon page, where you'll find a few ways to support us. So, if you like what we're doing, hit the link and check out the options for support. And thank you again, Douglas, for your financial support.
All right, let's have a discussion on citizenship. It's always a big deal whenever we are coming up on elections or whenever there's a big international incident with crossing borders, either between Mexico and the United States or anywhere else really. Anytime that's part of the discussion, people start talking about citizenship and who has the right to be on one particular side of this boundary. And when they are there, what sorts of rights and privileges do you get if you're a citizen of that area? So I think that what is particularly interesting for us as Christians is this idea of citizenship. And when we engage with politics, what does citizenship mean? What does it mean to Christians? What does it mean to Christians that choose to participate in politics or vote during the voting season? So I wanted to just kind of pull out a few things from the Bible dealing with citizenship and just see what it is that we can really take away from this. So first off, I want to just start from ground zero, right? And, let's get our facts straight. Let's look at citizenship from the dictionary, so there's no question what we're talking about. So if you look up dictionary.com, I think it's a great resource. They've got a handy little app. You look up citizenship, and it's referred to as the state of being vested with the rights, privileges, and duties of a citizen. And so what is a citizen? It goes further to say a native or a naturalized member of a state or a nation who owes allegiance to its government and is entitled to its protection. Also, an inhabitant of a city or town, especially one entitled to its privileges or franchises. So there's our pretty basic understanding of what citizenship is and what is a citizen. Now, so as a Christian, what is our citizenship? Now, Christians exist in every country, and we're united by faith in God. And if someone says, what is your citizenship? Do you first respond with that you're a citizen of the country that you were born in. And Philippians 3:20 actually lays it out very clearly for Christians. It says, "But our citizenship is in heaven, and from it we await a Savior, the Lord Jesus Christ." So there you go. Our citizenship is in heaven. When we call ourselves Christians, we are then putting that citizenship before anything else, before any other citizenship that we might be able to claim. Or at least we should. Now, here's an interesting thing, though. With having citizenship somewhere, there are some countries that have dual citizenship. They allow dual citizenship. And I wonder, is this a concept that we can apply to ourselves? Now, the answer is no. If we're referring to our dual citizenship as in our second citizenship is somehow related to or equal to our citizenship in heaven that we're told about in Philippians. But I do think that there is room for a good discussion in acknowledging this worldly citizenship. So before you get angry with me here, I'm not at all saying that citizenship in a country is equal to the citizenship in heaven. And this brings me to a topic that comes up from time to time whenever discussing politics, especially from an individualist or anarchist or anti-state or free state, person. If you discuss anything dealing with the Constitution or laws that are already on the books and working within those laws, or bringing up the Constitution while you discuss how people are not obeying their Constitution when they claim to be constitutionalist and obey the Constitution, I think it's handy to bring up these things, to be knowledgeable about the Constitution, to be knowledgeable about your local laws and regulations. And like I said, when you discuss this, there are many times that people will immediately say, well, why are we even talking about this? We don't believe in a state. And that's misguided. Yes, our preference is that there is no central control over us, that there is no state. But as we live in a state, it is good to understand the laws that state has put on itself even. And that is, supposedly what the Constitution is. And, as far as my personal convictions on the Constitution, I'm with Lysander Spooner, that it's either brought us this terrible abusive government that we have, or it's been powerless to stop it. And either way, it's unfit to exist. That's my personal opinion. I also am very interested in what the Constitution says. I'm very interested in the people that say that they are a constitutionalist or follow the Constitution or love the Constitution or in any manner elevates the Constitution, yet they don't follow it. I'm very interested in that. And I like to have those conversations where someone says, "Oh, I'm good with getting rid of guns. I'm good with all forms of gun control, and I'm a constitutionalist." Well, you you obviously don't know the Constitution. It's the same thing with any of these these privacy laws where they're taking away our constitutionally acknowledged rights. Going over all those things, and I'm sure right now you're even thinking of even better examples of a time where you've had a discussion with someone who says they're a constitutionalist, follows the Constitution or whatever, and they have no problem with just forgetting, just wiping that away, just forgetting about any of these things that come into conflict with their philosophy that they're giving you. So again, when you bring up the Constitution, you get flagged pretty quickly by anti-state types. Again, that they'll say, I don't know why we're even talking about this. Why is an anarchist talking about, a state and the Constitution? Why are we talking about politics? Well, as a Christian anarchist, I think that we have some pretty good examples of what we should do in these situations. And so I guess it could go either way. Do these examples show us that you should never speak of local laws? Or do these examples tell us how it's good to know? It's good to know the local laws. It's good to know what your citizenship means on the ground that you're standing on. So, when doing that, you can go to a couple places in Acts. And if you're not familiar, Acts is the book that comes after our four Gospels, and it's written by Luke. So Luke also wrote the Gospel of Luke, and he also wrote the book of Acts. And so they kind of go together. So the Gospel of Luke is Luke's telling of the story of Christ, and then it's like part two of the story is Acts, and it just keeps going. And so the Acts is also called the Acts of the Apostles. And Luke tells us all of the events from Christ's death and resurrection, and then the apostles setting out and preaching the gospel. And there are a couple of events in the book of Acts that I think are very relevant to our discussion here. So the first one that I would bring up is Acts chapter 16. And we're following Paul at this point. And this is a fairly well-known portion of the book. So we're following Paul at this point, and he is traveling to Macedonia. And Macedonia, like all the other areas at this time, are under Roman law, Roman colonization. So this is now a colony of Rome. And we see this in the 11th verse, in the 11th and 12th verse. It's explaining his route and where he went. So he's staying in Macedonia for a little while, and he's, of course, going to the temple. When he goes to the temple, he meets a slave girl who has a spirit of divination. And from this spirit of divination, she brings her owners much gain by fortune telling, is how it puts it in 16. So she's a fortune teller, and she's getting paid. People are coming to her, and they're paying her to give them their fortunes. And she followed Paul and the other apostles that are with Paul, and she's yelling out that these men are servants of the Most High, who proclaim to you the way of salvation. So she's kind of supernaturally just yelled this out about Paul and the apostles. And it says that she kept doing this for many days, and it really annoyed Paul. And so he turns to her and he says to the spirit, I command you in the name of Jesus Christ to come out of her. And it came out of her that very hour. So here we have an exorcism of sorts. And it was because of this spirit that she was able to, tell the future, and therefore was valuable to her slave owners, So when her owners saw that they no longer had any money to make off of her, they seized Paul and Silas and dragged them into the marketplace before the rulers. And when they had brought them to the magistrates, they said, "These men are Jews, and they are disturbing our city. They advocate customs that are not lawful for us as Romans to accept or practice." So this is the, accusation against Paul and Silas. And the crowd wasn't very happy with it. They joined in with them, and they were beaten. Paul and Silas were beaten. And so the jailer, they were ordered to go with this jailer and be locked in the prison. So about midnight, and this is the more famous part of the story among Christians, around midnight, Paul and Silas are praying and singing hymns, and there's a big earthquake, and all the doors of the prison were open. But Paul and Silas, they didn't leave. So it was the next day now, and the magistrates sent the police saying, "Let those men go." And the jailer reported these words to Paul, and that the magistrates have sent them to be let go. Therefore, come out and go in peace. But Paul said to them, and this is something that I think is part of our key takeaway here on this part of the discussion, because there's a lot of great stuff in this passage. But for this discussion on citizenship, Paul said to them, "They have beaten us publicly, uncondemned, men who are Roman citizens, and have thrown us into prison. And do they now throw us out secretly? No. Let them come themselves and take us out." So this is a very brave and strong reaction from Paul, that he knows that these men have broken their own laws. And he's going to make a big deal about it. And the police, they report back to the magistrates. And then they were afraid when they heard what they did to these Roman citizens, because there were laws against this. If you were a Roman citizen, you lived under a certain set of laws that were applicable to you, that no one else had in all these areas that Rome was colonizing. So this actually did bring the magistrates out to the jail, and apologized for them. And then they asked them to leave the city. And so I say all this to show that here we have an example of Paul, the greatest preacher, and he's saying that they are Roman citizens. And I in no way think that he was putting his Roman citizenship at all on the same level of his citizenship in heaven. It's just a different context here. But in this context, it's very similar to the conversations that we can have about what rights we know we have, that the rights that the Constitution acknowledges, that we know that we can address our government and say, no, these are the rules that you've set up. These are the rules that you're running by. This is how you're wrong. And that's exactly what Paul did here. All right, so moving on to the next one. The second spot that I'd like to point out is in Acts 21. Well, it starts in 21 and actually carries over to Acts 22. And so to set it up here, in Acts 21, we have Paul going to Jerusalem. And while in Jerusalem, of course, he goes to the temple, and he is spending time in the temple. And after about 7 days, I believe it is, he's the Jews from Asia, it says in verse 27, they're seeing him in the temple, and it stirred up the whole crowd, and they laid hands on him, crying out, "Men of Israel, help. This is the man who is teaching everyone everywhere against the people and the law and this place. Moreover, he even brought Greeks into the temple and has defiled this holy place." So very, very big deal that Paul was speaking the gospel, which of course can appear contradictory to the Jewish religion, and that up to this point, Paul was a Jew, is a Jew, but not in the religious sense any longer after his conversion. So he's arrested, and there's a big hubbub where it actually alerts the tribune, the Roman guards, right? So they come and to see what this big mob is going on, and remember, this is under Roman military occupation, right? So you see all the locals getting crazy, and so you take some soldiers down and you go and figure out what's going on, right? And so they see the mob is just looking at Paul, pointing at Paul. They're saying, "Away with him! This guy, he's speaking against the temple and breaking our laws and things like that," right? So they arrest Paul real quick. Obviously, you're going to arrest the perceived rabble rouser, right? So, and the mob is actually so bad that the soldiers they've got him chained. They've got Paul chained up, but they're having to carry him away from all this, right? So they take him back to the barracks, and as Paul is about to be brought into the barracks, he asks the tribune, "May I say something to you?" And then the tribune, he responds, "Do you know Greek? Are you not the Egyptian then who recently stirred up a revolt and led the 4,000 men of the assassins out into the wilderness?" And so obviously the tribune here thinks that Paul's this guy, who I'm not real sure of the historical significance of that moment, but I mean, these things happen under occupation of foreign forces, that the locals, they build up, militias or groups, and they try to fight back and push back where they can. So obviously that this guy thought that that's probably who Paul was. And so Paul says, "I am a Jew from Tarsus in Cilicia, a citizen of no obscure city. I beg you to permit me to speak to the people." So here he is again. He's referencing his citizenship, and it's allowing him to have these conversations with these people who otherwise probably wouldn't value anything that he had to say. But because he can point to his Roman citizenship, they'll allow him, right? So they allow him to stand and address the people. And there was a great hush, it says, and he addressed the people in Hebrew. So, and that's where it carries over to chapter 22. So Paul addresses these people in Hebrew, and he says, "I'm a Jew, born in Tarsus." He's laying out his credentials of who he is, why he should be able to speak, why they should listen to him. He says that he was brought up according to the strict manner of the law of our fathers, being zealous for God, as all of you are this day. I persecuted this way, referring to Christians. I persecuted Christians to the death, binding and delivering to prison both men and women, as the high priest and the whole council of elders can bear me witness. From them I received letters to the brothers, and I journeyed toward Damascus, to take those also who were there and bring them in bonds to Jerusalem to be punished. So this is, what's referred to as, Paul on the road to Damascus, and he goes on further to explain the moment where Christ suddenly appears to him and says, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" And Saul says, "Who are you, Lord?" And this great light, says, "I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom you are persecuting." He now he goes further to say, that everyone was around him. They didn't see this, and but he was blinded, and so Jesus now tells Paul to rise and go into Damascus, and to be taken to Ananias. And once he meets with Ananias, he'll receive his sight back. And so this has got to be a really weird moment, for Ananias, that the man who was on his way to come and arrest you and have you thrown in prison or even killed, he's got to go to this guy because God told him to, just told him to go to him, and that's how he's going to get his sight back. So the chapter goes on more where Paul wraps this up, and he's witnessing to the Jews that he was one of them, and but now he's a follower of the way. He's a follower of Christ. And again in verse 25, he gets into another part that is, I think, relevant for our conversation here about citizenship. And so after he's done speaking to everyone about his conversion experience on the road to Damascus, they were listening the whole time. But then it says that they raised their voices and said, "Away with him," and that he shouldn't be allowed to live. And as they were shouting and throwing off their cloaks and flinging dust into the air, the tribune ordered him to be brought into the barracks, saying that he should be examined by flogging, to find out why they were shouting against him like this. So that's verse 24, and 25 through 28 really gets into the heart of this citizenship discussion. So verse 25 says, "But when they had stretched him out for their whips, Paul said to the centurion who was standing by, 'Is it lawful for you to flog a man who is a Roman citizen and uncondemned?' When the centurion heard this, he went to the tribune and said to him, 'What are you about to do?' For this man is a Roman citizen." So the tribune came to him and said, "Tell me, are you a Roman citizen?" And Paul said, "Yes." The tribune answered, "I bought this citizenship for a large sum." Paul said, "But I am a citizen by birth." So those who were about to examine him withdrew from him immediately, and the tribune was also afraid, for he realized that Paul was a Roman citizen, and he had bound him. So here we have it again, where Paul knows what he's talking about with what rights he has as a Roman citizen, born under the Roman occupation, now a Roman citizen, and what these men were doing, they could not do. And he points it out to them, and they react accordingly, just like the last time. So just to finish up his story, it says, "But on the next day, desiring to know the real reason why he was being accused by the Jews, he unbound him and commanded the chief priest and all the council to meet, and he brought Paul down and set him before them." So then it goes on further to Acts 23, where Paul then again speaks to the Jews about his conversion. And so again, we have this example of Paul pointing out it's no different than when we know our history of the country that we're in, that we know the laws and we know the Constitution. Again, we have Acts 25, where this is Paul appealing to Caesar, and he references his citizenship. Again, I'm not going to go over the whole chapter on this one, but he uses his citizenship to even go before the king. And again, knowing what his citizenship means, what he can do with it. So there we have it. Again, I know I keep bringing it back around to knowing the Constitution and things like that, but I think this is my answer to that, accusation or complaint when someone who does claim to, be an anarchist, why we even discuss the Constitution. And here we have a good example, a very good example of one of the greatest Christians to ever live. And he didn't mix up his citizenship. He didn't give equal love or allegiance to Rome, but he knew what the Romans would do, knowing where he was born, following their own rules, following their own regulations that they have concerning citizenship. And so, I guess just to finish this off, our citizenship is in heaven. And though we do not put it anywhere near our citizenship in the United States or Canada or Australia or Mexico, Brazil, Russia, wherever, it is helpful to know the rights and privileges that are given to you because of where you're born. But like so many, we need to be very careful. Paul didn't think that he was a Roman and a Christian. He used this. It was a tactic. And he was right. He was right for using it. And so I hope this was interesting. I hope that, maybe I introduced some new ideas or some new Bible verses for you to consider, and maybe gave you a different angle whenever you are facing this sort of accusation. Or if you are someone who likes to point out that someone who's a Christian anarchist shouldn't have anything to say about the Constitution. Well, there's a lot of value in knowing the laws and the rights and privileges that you are given for whatever country you're a citizen of. And I just think that it's important for all of us to know that there is a balance to all of it, where we do not hold our earthly citizenship anywhere near the value of our citizenship in heaven. And as far as I'm concerned, there really is no other citizenship. These other nations, they don't really matter.
So let me know if I've changed your mind or given you something to think about. Let me know on iTunes or wherever you catch your podcast episodes. You can also find us on social media, and also don't forget to check out the Amazon store where you'll find t-shirts and hoodies. And until next time, grace and peace, no king but Christ.
Thank you for listening to the Anarcho-Christian Podcast. Subscribe to our email notifications at anarchochristian.com, like us on facebook.com/anarchochristian, and follow us on Twitter at anarchoxp. Subscribe to our podcast and YouTube to join us next time as we continue to evaluate the relationship between the Christian and the state. No king but Christ.
This has been a Pax Libertas Productions podcast.